Good afternoon. My name's Emily Butler. I'm the curator of the Conversations program. Thank you all so much for being with us this afternoon. I'm really excited to hear from our next three panelists, who are all institutional leaders who've just completed new buildings, who are working on upcoming projects. And they will be discussing not only extending their facilities, but also what does it mean to renew an institution. So I'm really honored that we have on stage with us today Jillian Jones, the Deputy Director of Buffalo AKG Museum, Tonya Matthews, the President of the International African American Museum in Charleston, and Silvia Cubiñá, the Director and Chief Curator of the Basel here in Miami. The panel is moderated by author and cultural strategy advisor András Szántó, with whom we've collaborated very closely to bring this panel today here to you. So there'll be time for questions at the end, but first of all, please do join me in giving our speakers a very warm round of applause and enjoy the conversation.
Welcome, everyone. Thanks for coming. This is actually a lovely moment because there's actually a wonderful connection between the previous panel and this one, which is a great tradition that we should follow in the future as well. And I'd like to begin by thanking the team. As you all know, it takes really a village, and my colleagues here know how much it goes into these types of events because you all do them. So everyone's input is greatly appreciated. Art Basel is fully back, as I'm sure you've noticed. And one of the great features of this show has always been that we have a little bit of intellectual stimulation along with the commercial stimulation that's happening out there. And we pause to reflect on the field. So thank you to the show management, to everyone who helped put this on. And thank you, all of you, for being here. The fact that you're in this room at 3 p.m. On this day probably means that you care enough about museums and know enough about museums to know that they're going through a period of accelerated change. There are many ways to describe these changes. Books have been written about them, but perhaps one of the most succinct ways I've heard it described is that museums are pivoting away from a primarily object-oriented position to one that is more of a community-oriented, people-focused way of working, from objects to people. Now, I'm not saying we're throwing the objects away and only focusing on people. We can walk and chew gum at the same time, but there's a sort of a shift in emphasis in what we have to do, which, by the way, means more work to do. These shifts have really been going on for a long time in the museum field, but they were given a boost in the pandemic period, both because the pandemic made all of us sort of pause and think about where things are moving, but also in the wake of the George Floyd protests and all the protests in this country, which left museums in the positions of really having to look in the mirror and think about where they sit in society and also about their ways of working. And some of the things that they have to think about hard are what we collect and exhibit and how museums can be more open and welcoming to all kinds of people. What does it mean to tell stories, histories in new ways that are more inclusive and complex? How are we supposed to use all this new technology that is transforming all of our lives? How do we find and, quite frankly, retain staff and devise modes of governance that are suitable for a public institution in this moment? Last but not least, how do we raise money and float the boat and find ways of securing revenues old and new? So those are just some of the challenges that your speakers today have to contend with on a daily basis. If they look a little tired, it's because they've got a big plate. Not that they do look tired, they look fabulous.
Don't get in trouble.
So few people have to think about these issues as much as museum directors, and particularly museum directors who are either working on opening new museums or reopening museums and expanded facilities, working on reconfiguring their museums. So we thought it would be really interesting this year to pull together a group who are all either about to reshape their institutions or have recently reshaped their older institutions, or in fact have taken the helm of brand new institutions. These are places where you really have an opportunity to sort of think about, well, how should we really do this? And there are a lot of museums opening these days. There's quite a few colleagues in the field who sort of in the same situation. Studio Museum is about to open in Harlem. University museums at Williams and in Princeton are about to open. Wonderful museum. If you visit Omaha, Nebraska, the Jocelyn is about to open with a $140 million renovation. And these are the places where some of the deepest thinking is going on about where the museum should be going. So this is a very big challenge, but also a great opportunity and responsibility that you all have. So the question is, though, how do you meet this moment? How are you supposed to do it? So luckily, we have three great people who will tell us how. They've already been introduced, Silvia, Tonya, Jillian, and I will say more about them in a minute. But how about another round of applause, because, you know, they're going to work hard here. So as you'll see, these are three different institutions in three very different cities, three different institutional histories, one of them, some of them much older, some quite new. You'll find out more in a second. But what I thought we could do, just sort of ease into the discussion, is I'm going to ask each of you to, first of all, just share a few words about what your institution's all about, because not everybody here might know, and sort of what the process of thinking about and thinking about rejuvenating the institution or building the institution, you know, what ideas that crystallized in you. And we're going to start with Silvia Cubiñá, right here to my left, who probably needs the least introduction to this audience because she's been running the incredible Basel Museum, which is only steps away from here, so you have no excuse if you don't visit it during this Art Basel. All the more so because, and here I come back to the previous panel, some of you might have been in the room an hour ago when they were talking about Nam June Paik's incredible exhibition. I had no idea personally that Nam June Paik had this deep history with Miami, so there's a lot you can learn there. There's also a great Herman Bass show. And of course, you can look at the building and reflect on everything you're about to hear. So Silvia, you've been looking at an expansion of this museum in what is arguably the fastest changing city in the US. How do you aim for this moving target?
That's a very good question, András. And so Basel Museum is Miami Beach's contemporary art museum. And our mission is centered around creating connections between international contemporary art and our diverse communities. But of course, we have that mission statement. And when you have such diverse community and increasingly such a changing demographic, it's a moving target, like you said. We started a visioning committee at the board level, and we have stakeholders that we've been bringing in. By the way, just to backtrack, 2024 is our 60th anniversary. We are the oldest civic museum in Miami-Dade County. And in November last year, the city of Miami Beach released a GO bonds. They had the Miami Beach taxpayers voted to tax themselves to give major organizations in the city funds for expansions. So the ballet, the symphony, all of us got a very good chunk of money to build. And so that was something surprising and wonderful and really great and sort of like you're saying, changing everything. We had just done a strategic plan, then COVID hit, and now this wonderful surprise. So it's this ever-changing set of rules. So when you're trying to create connections, going back to our mission statement, how do you create connections in this ever-changing first COVID, then no COVID, then hyper, everyone moving here, and then our diverse communities? Who are these diverse communities? Is it the people coming here? Is it the people who've already come here. Can you say everybody? What does that mean? Because you have to come up with a subset of everybody in order to market and get to and invite over. So all of these things come into play. So next year, we're celebrating our 60th, and we're also continue with our visioning committee. And we started with you. You launched our visioning committee.
Full disclosure.
And so what does it mean to be a contemporary art museum in Miami Beach right now, was the question.
What does it mean?
Well, we have some hints. There are some hints. We want gathering spaces where art and people gather and coexist. But what does that mean? We have these wonderful nightclubs and pools and where people are gathering and listening to music. All the hotels and clubs in Miami Beach, they do it really well. So we don't want to be a nightclub because we're not going to do it as well as they are. But we have some models, we have some role models, and I want to mention Books and Books in Coral Gables and Palais de Tokyo in Paris. So we're looking at role models, and we're trying to understand and have conversations with different stakeholders to see how those can adapt to who we are here. But really the answer to your question is we're going to experiment and fail a few times.
You know, good for you, because we have some supporters. You know, it's good for you because our field, I think the museum field is often reluctant to roll the dice a little bit and experiment. One of the things about this environment is that there's so many new organizations as well. I mean, steps away from you, you have the Symphony now, obviously Art Basel. It seems like every year I come, there's some new initiative brewing. And how can you pull some of that together to sort of form a district or some kind of unified cultural zone down here? Is that something you're thinking about?
We are thinking about that. In fact, we just had a few conversations with the neighborhood stakeholders in Collins Park, and we hired Perkins and Will, and they do urban planning. So we're trying to understand if it's a neighborhood and how to unify the neighborhood. Is it branding? Is it wayfinding? How do we do this? But it's also conversations with our other stakeholders across the bridge. You know, that's very important as well. But I go back to experimentation, and I'll give you an example. This year, our curator, James Voorhees, is here, created a show, kind of a show. It's one of those experiments that we're going to see if we fail or succeed or both at the same time. And it's called Social Assembly. So it's an exhibition with art that you can touch, or it's too high for you to touch. No guards, or maybe a guard sitting at a chair. You can eat, have your cappuccino, listen to music, and there's a bar right now. So how do people connect with this space is our first experiment, like real live experiment into seeing what people want and how do people even want that?
I have a feeling they will. Tonya, we're going to move on to you. This is all going to be news for most of you, I think, because Tonya is here representing the newest museum, the International African American Museum. And you've been in this role really since April 2021, if I'm not wrong. The museum itself opened in June in a PACOB building. It's glorious. And you're a real thought leader, and you're a poet, you're an engineer, you're a former university provost in Detroit, so you bring a lot of perspectives, but I believe you hadn't run a museum before.
No, this is my second time as president and CEO of a museum. It was a science museum.
A science, an art museum. Yeah. So it was a science museum.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about the project.
Sure.
And, you know, what has surprised you since the opening?
Well, one, I'm picking up, we're probably going to hear a lot of themes as we go through, because some of the things you talked about resonate with our experience. And I want to acknowledge folks who actually do the work in the audience. Our Chief Learning and Engagement Officer and Director of Curation and Exhibitions are here with the museum this week. So the International African American Museum opened up on June 27th at 10 a.m. But it was the culmination of a 23-year project. We are a first voice institution. This basically means that we are telling the African American historical story from an African American perspective and an African American voice. And so there's a lot that goes along with that. But I think, what I'll focus on for a community like this is location. So one of the things we talk about is our power of place. The building hovers over the site of Gadsden's Wharf, our nation's former most prolific slave trading port. Depending on the historian you're talking about, you get to numbers of nearly half of what we think of United States of America. This was the port of entry for these enslaved Africans during its heyday. Gadsden's Wharf was the largest such complex in all of North America. So you've got that power of place. And one of the things Mr. Cobb did was it was his architectural decision to hover the museum over the ground because the ground was more important than the building itself would ever be. And so that was his way of making that acknowledgement. And then it opened up our downstairs for an African Ancestors Memorial Garden that was then designed by landscape architect Walter Hood. So one of the things people immediately pick up on is the intentionality of all the design. Every space, every footstep, every corner really has some intentionality around it. So that said, I think one of the things that I've seen as modern challenges for museums is we have more or less moved from the question of should we talk about that, whatever that is with a capital T, to how do we talk about that, right? And so that's the space that we're in. And so when you think about the International African American Museum, at this time in the world, in the Deep South, some might say the heart of the South, being in Charleston, South Carolina, how are we going to talk about this conversation around the African American journey? One, we put it in full context. Though we honor the power of place, we do acknowledge that this period of enslavement is neither the beginning nor the end of the African American journey. It's in the middle, right? So now you're talking centuries, and what do folks have? 2.5 hours? The timeline starts at 300 BCE. We take it all the way up to 2021. How are we going to get you through that space? So we think about that. The second thing that we think about, and it's one of the things we can do as a First Voice institution, is we really emphasize that the core of, as we say, how we got over, is about African Americans' ability to simultaneously hold the sensations of trauma and joy. Not trauma on Tuesday and joy on Thursday, it's wrapped in together. So when you add that to the way we curate, the way we design and the intentionality, you're not gonna get the, all right, I need a moment, I'm gonna go to the happy side of the museum, or I'm ready, take me to the dark side. That every space, every exhibition, every object is gonna have elements of all of that in it. Okay, so that's good. And then we get into something that Silvia mentioned, which is the diversity of audiences. When it comes to a single story that different people are going to have a different relationship with, that gets into some really interesting conversations around interpretation and design and spacing and how you lead folks to it. And I would say one of the things that's been really, really interesting about what we've observed from our visitors is that folks do not do the typical honoring of personal space in museums. You know how it works in museums, right? You're trying to read this thing and then someone's going to give you at least 5 feet until you finish reading. They're waiting for you to move, and then they'll come in and take that space. What we have sort of noticed is that strangers kind of co-gather around what it is they want to see. One, it's striking because it's a museum space, but two, it's striking because of the stories that we're telling, right? Stories that were held in secret, and stories that we thought were too dangerous or too provocative to be talking about in public, let alone in public with strangers. So as we see people gathering in that way, it's been a source of sort of pride and fascination for us. It was indeed what we were trying to do, but we didn't know we'd be able to accomplish that. The other thing that we've noticed, to your point, is we do have a special exhibitions gallery, and our claim to fame someday, we're less than 6 months old, we'll be claiming fame someday, will be that we are being very intentional about our interim exhibition space, and we call it creative gatherings. And it is a way of surrounding a gathering space with contemporary art. So that people will go in and sit and talk, and we can do some of our programming in that space. One of the unique things about us as a history museum, in addition to the intentionality of the design, is that we chose to go in the contemporary art direction with our collection. One of the things that most museums, definitely history museums, are not designed to do is change, ever. So it was one of the things we tried to think about. And so our contemporary art collection is dispersed through the museum in what I refer to as a floating gallery. And so those pieces can be changed in and out far easier than our core exhibitions, in addition to our special exhibition gallery.
Don't you all just want to go, like, right now? I mean, I think it sounds like an amazing place. Just quickly tell me two things. One is does that mean eventually there will be a collection of objects and artworks? And who is this audience that has showed up? Can you just tell us, like, demographically?
So, our opening collection is just around 700 objects, arts, artifacts, just over 1,000 rights to images. We have a lot of media in the space as well, including 40 plus pieces that were designed just for us. So it's a very active and vibrant space, so we can give a feeling of culture and movement and moving on. My tagline is always "the journey continues," and so it does feel almost unfinished. Our audience right now has been really interesting. So one, we are actually seeing high African American attendance. And you may think, of course you are, you're an African American museum. A couple things to think about is that the history of our storied institutions, our high institutions like museums, like art galleries, have not always been welcoming to disenfranchised communities, African American communities in particular. So it is never as simple as build it and they will come. Charleston is also a high tourism space, so we do have the ability to pull and host, but it's one of the more expensive places to visit. And so often people have a reason or it's on the list. So we've been very excited about the reception from the African American community, particularly African Americans who do reside in South Carolina, who have been the keepers of these stories that, for lack of a better phrase, we were not telling very well. And then, of course, we do have a majority audience and international audience that is coming in. Our age demographic is skewing all over the place, but one of the things I will say is we do see a lot of African American children because we're getting a lot of sort of family reunions and you got to know this and this is where we go. And in retrospect, I remember answering questions when folks would ask what age is appropriate for the museum. At some point, I realized that African American audiences were never asking what age was appropriate. They had clearly decided. Junior and Junior was getting buckled up in the car, and they were coming to this museum. In terms of that, and so it's been really interesting, I think, to watch that, and we're getting a lot of, I would say, not necessarily history museum goers, which is also, I think, a really good sign for us.
Great, Jillian. It's actually a very interesting thread around community spaces. I mean, both of you have spoken a little bit about your attempts, and I have a feeling we'll hear a little bit more in a second. Jillian is deputy director at the some of you know it as the Albright Knox Museum. We're now supposed to say AKG Gallery, I think. But you've been in this role since earlier this year, so it's early 23, and you were director of advancement, which means you helped raise the $230 million, which was the capital campaign in Buffalo. Buffalo's been a historically very generous city to the arts, and this is the crown jewel of Buffalo. And you were previously at Virginia Museum of Fine Arts, but you're sort of coming from the business side of the house, as it were. So tell us how you got here, and not you personally, but the museum, and what this experience of reopening this magnificently expanded museum has meant for you.
Well, so many things that both of you said I want to address, but let's talk about the name first, right? Because everyone says, what is this Buffalo AKG Art Museum business? So we've had 4 names throughout our history. We're really comfortable with change. We were founded in 1862, so we are the 6th oldest art museum in the United States. And in our founding documents, it says that we're dedicated to the art of our time, which makes us the oldest modern and contemporary art museum in the United States. We started as the Buffalo Fine Arts Academy. When we moved into our first permanent home in 1905, which is this sort of glorious Beaux-Arts building of the moment, we became the Albright Art Gallery, honoring the major patron at the time, John J. Albright. When we expanded in the mid-century in 1962, there was a major patron, Seymour Knox. We became the Albright Knox Art Gallery. And then ushering forth this rejuvenation of the museum that we just opened in June of this year, we had a new major patron, Jeffrey Gunlock, who stepped up and said, I want to make this possible. And he really rallied a lot of other generous donors to the table. But he also said, it's important that this incredible collection that travels the world all the time, when it's in Paris or when it's in Budapest, we want people to not say, where is the Albright Knox Art Gallery? We want them to see Buffalo first. And so we changed our name to acknowledge that and to acknowledge that we are a museum first, a place for people to come and be inspired and to be with community. So we had 2 historic buildings on our campus. We still do. And Buffalo is a post-industrial steel city. You know, we really have suffered economic challenges since the mid-century, like a lot of our brother and sister cities up north. And for a long time, I think the spirit of Buffalo was waiting for something waiting for a Super Bowl and waiting for something very, very exciting to get behind. And so when we had the opportunity to expand and knew we needed to address our 2 existing historic buildings, we went all in on a $195 million expansion and renovation. And so I'm so glad that you started, András, talking about community, because these historic buildings, you know them, you've seen them, they are opaque in nature, right? They don't have windows so much. They are marble edifices, or the 62 one has a marble plinth and all black glass. You can't see in. And if you've never been there before, if you feel intimidated by a museum, what's going to make you come in? You're going to want to feel invited. You're going to want to have some sort of sense of, I belong there. I know what's happening in there. That's not a mystery. And so we worked with our amazing architects, Shohei Shigematsu of OMA and his team, and we envisioned a brand new glass pavilion. It is entirely glass. The art is inside of a sort of protected box, and then there is a 360-degree walkway around it that brings a significant amount of transparency to the building. It's hard to program a building that is entirely glass, and we knew that was going to happen, but we felt so committed to that architectural gesture that we went down that road with our architects. In one of our historic buildings, the 1962 building, it had a courtyard, an outdoor sculpture courtyard that was built for members. It was a members' lounge, an inherently exclusive structure, right? And think about this: we're a 4-season city, and this is Buffalo. I mean, we don't necessarily have too many reliably sunny days, except in the middle of the summer season. And so we wanted to take what felt like an exclusionary space and make it a very inclusive space. And so we covered it with a sculpture by Olafur Eliasson and Sebastian Bayman of Studio Other Spaces. That is, if you look at it online, it is entirely covered with mirrors. And this comprises a space that we call the town square. We've made that entire building free, and it acts like a town square. It is surrounded by other spaces, a cafe, a shop, the kinds of things that you might find in a very familiar town square setting. and it is entirely free to the public. I think the thing that I really learned is that despite the fact that I think museum professionals often think of themselves as having very noble purpose to their career, preservation or education, we're in the hospitality business now. This is a different industry. And there's a survey that came out this month that surveyed adults and it asked what they expected to experience at a museum. 72% expected to be entertained. And I think now that means that we have established an ethos at our institution of radical hospitality. Our amazing visitor experience team carries that forth. And so that means very basic things, going a little bit above and beyond to make somebody feel welcome. They left something in a gallery, I'll go and get it for you, whatever that might be. I'm gonna give you free parking today if you had your bad experience, whatever that is, making people feel welcome. That extends onto the walls too. How does our curatorial team, how do our learning creativity team extend hospitality into the learning experiences? And so I think that's something that we're all learning in this.
Yeah, I mean, thank you. Like tomorrow's newspaper is going to read 3 museums directors say we're in the hospitality business.
Because we're nodding our heads
But
here.
if you are in the which I, by the way, agree with the sentiment. I'm just curious, though, where do you, as you were thinking about this, where did you look to as models for that? Now, who's getting that right? Not necessarily other museums, although please mention if there are other museums that are gathering right. But what other type of institutions or businesses have figured out this sort of radical hospitality idea?
I wonder what others have to say, because I mean, we really looked to places that were not necessarily museums. I mean, we looked to a lot of our peers. We spoke, the museum industry is very close knit, and we talk to each other all the time. We learn from each other. But in this instance, we actually looked to places around the world that have what you would call third spaces, the space that is not your home and it's not your work, it's your gathering space. And so we did a lot of research in that realm, and we actually found a place in Copenhagen. I'm gonna butcher the name, so I'm not even gonna try and say. It's like I can email it to y'all. It was a former church that a couple had bought and turned into like a perfect third space. They hosted dinner every night. You go, and it's very simple, and you get a tray and you serve everyone at your table, and it's like a family dinner but with people that you don't know. Or it's a place for kids to do homework, and they have very basic resources. And it's like a community center, but also cultural in nature and serving basic needs, but in a cultural setting. And we took a lot of inspiration from that sort of concept.
Silvia, Tonya, are you looking at other spaces?
Yeah, so that is brilliant. I wrote that down. We'll spell your name correctly when I quote you. In terms of that, because our outdoor space is also open and free to the public, and we manage it, almost like a park. And so being in this space and thinking about how to use that. So 2 of my sort of go-tos, interestingly, one was a boutique restaurant-ish concept in Detroit, Michigan, called the Revolver. And basically, they created the infrastructure of a restaurant without the restaurant. And they'll just periodically invite chefs in for a takeover. The chefs will decide whatever prefix menu it is. They'll have 5 settings, boom, done, that's it. Because of the level of traffic we're having, yay, our cafe space can't be used during like regular daytime hours the way we'd want to envision it. So, I've been looking at that concept. One of the things we thought about for our shop, we really want to be able to use small Black, African-American, African diasporic businesses and vendors, and they don't often have what they need to do to meet your supply chain needs. And so we call it sort of the Trader Joe model, which is if you like it, you better buy 4, because you don't know if they will ever have this product. I see the Trader Joe folks again. And so looking at the way that they turn that into special, not exclusive, and not making it stressful. You just kind of know that that's sort of the culture. So those are some of the places that we've actually looked at.
How about you, Silvia?
We're looking at Books and Books. I did mention that
Yes, you
earlier.
did, yeah.
It's an amazing place in Coral Gables, led by Mitch Kaplan, who founded the International Book Fair here. It's a place that's kind of open all the time. There are, every single night they have book presentations. Somehow you go, there's always wine and food, a book to buy, something else, and people you bump into. So it's this wonderful community area space that you can just go to and things happen, which is, it's not planned.
Well, some of you may be a little surprised at this, but this is the stuff museum directors are talking about, because you're living in the 21st century and you want to bring 21st century people in. So this is not an outlier conversation. This is really very much at the heart of what the field is talking about. So I want to go into a couple of other issues. I mean, we've all talked about the audience and being for everyone, but I just want to challenge that or question that, like, what does that really mean? I mean, everyone is not 100, nobody gets 100%. The NFL doesn't get 100%. Churches don't get 100%. So realistically, when we say we're for everyone, is there a part of society that we can never reach? Or what are your thoughts on the audience proposition?
So I think the latest thinking that personally and also some colleagues are in Miami right now, or at least I have it in my mind, is inequality and financial inequality. So lately I've been thinking, how do you level that a little bit, where people who think it's expensive to go to the museum or think membership is expensive, how do you bridge that and make it a happy, friendly place to invite people over and say, you can come for free. It's free on these 2 days. I think it's the rents that are going up here that, you know, that has everybody talking about this all the time. But I'm particularly interested in financial inequality. How do you bring communities and individuals in through the door and thinking, you know, we have the Tavares track and we belong here. So maybe subliminally we put that on the wall so people can think they do belong there. But seriously, how do you communicate that idea in a city that's gotten expensive, very expensive overnight?
You all have entry fees. You don't?
We do. We do have entry fees, but I will say our lowest ticket price is $2 for anyone that is on services, and we committed to funding all school students on school field trips for free. And I think, you know, it's very interesting because we're in an interesting intersection when you say you're for everyone, for community. So for us, candidly, serving what community is usually a stand-in for, meaning low income, minority, is kind of second nature to us. It is the other half of our community. If I were to dangerously sort of level up in the answer, I would say that part of the end game that we are a part of is dismantling institutionalized racism on a global scale. That has major implications for who we need in the museum, right? Who needs to feel comfortable, even though I don't like the word comfortable. I don't do safe spaces, I do spaces of courage. But what I will say is we define our audience as curious people. Now, if you've turned off your curious bone, there's probably nothing I can do for you right now. I'll get you later. But just in terms of curious, but even if you are curious, people do not want to walk into a space where they're going to feel like they're yelled at, screamed at, pointed at, lied to, told stories. So all of those kinds of things. So part of what, you know, we're working at is, you know, when we talk about media or contemporary art or objects or interactives or a park or a garden or sculpture, what you're literally talking about is different lures into the space. You may be a contemporary art person. You may have heard about this amazing water feature that overlooks the entry to the Atlantic Ocean. You may have heard about, you know, one of the newest finds in David Drake pottery or something like that. That may be what brings you into the space. And then the idea is, can we activate enough of your curiosity in a way that gets you to step just a little bit out of whatever zone you're in that will sort of keep you in that space? So for us, that challenge of community and welcoming everyone is kind of the topic of the day.
You know, another thing that cuts across that, because this conversation is constantly shifting. I mean, in the last 3 or 4 years, we had the Me Too movement. Obviously, there's a huge emphasis on diversity and inclusion in a race and class perspective. It's just been a opening up of the lens of the museum. But curiously, I wrote a book on the future of museums, and one subject that never came up was older people. And recently, we've been working with a lot of museums around the issue of ageism. One of the most salient things you can say about society demographically is that we're becoming an older society. And yet, very few people have been to a board meeting at a museum where people are like, what are we going to do getting more older people in? There's a lot of discussion about young people. So I'm curious about that and how you can tailor your museums to bring in an increasingly old population. Is that something that's on your minds? I mean, here in Miami.
Absolutely. We actually started, Kylie Crook, our Director of Education's right there. She started a program for older senior program. So we thought, okay, so let's do 10 a.m. cookies. And we
10
had,
a.m. cookies.
Yeah, and coffee. And they came a couple of times, said, oh, we love this, but can you make it 6 p.m. wine? And so,
They're starting to understand older people, yeah.
So again, you just go out there, do it, and then follow the guide, follow the experts on what they want to do.
Was that something you guys were thinking about?
I'm so happy you just said that, because we've been thinking about opening early on Thursdays from 9 to 10, making that senior hour. But no, we're gonna just shoot for the wine in the evenings. Thank you.
You'll unlock that audience.
Yeah, exactly.
No, it's interesting because you talk to museum directors about older people. I say, well, we have our Alzheimer's, situation, and and then you sort of say to them, that's kind of ageist, really. The vast majority of old people, want to have a glass of wine at 6 p.m. All right, well, let's move on. I don't know how we are in time. I want to, I'm going to go to a tough place for just 1 second. Staffing. Some of you might have read. We have 5 minutes. I'm curious, how many people might have a question? Okay, all right.
At least one.
All right, so we'll make sure. Okay, good. There'll be a few. So staffing. I mean, there's a lot of things we can talk about. Maybe they'll come up in the questions, but staffing is a huge issue in this field right now. Museums, newsflash, don't pay particularly well. There was a recent study or a report that said 60 to 70% of museum workers, maybe this is true of all workers, but they're thinking about maybe changing jobs or leaving. There's been quite a lot of unhappiness, quite a lot of internal conflict inside museums. Many museums, of course, unionizing right now as well. So I'm just curious how you are creating a workplace that is able to attract great people, retain great people, keep people happy.
I think one of the things to understand, because most of us, 98% or so, are in the nonprofit space, right? And so take this following statement as a grain of salt. All of our skills are translatable, right? So if you think about museums, we are businesses, we are places of education. All of our skills are translatable, particularly onto the for-profit side, right? I've got a head of marketing. They could go to Coca-Cola. I've got a squad of amazing educators. They could be at university. They could be at private schools. So all of our skills are translatable, and we're on the nonprofit side. And so, yeah, we do have the issue of pay scale. But what that means is the reason people come to work in this space is the driver, right? And so folks are not waking up one day in a museum and realizing, I could make more money if I worked at Procter & Gamble. That's not actually what's happening. I think a lot of what is finally coming to the surface is part of the delivery on the promise of culture and wanting to change the world and do something and be about something great. And one of the challenges about being in such an underfunded sector is often our focus is so much on the practicality and the bits and the pieces and trying to do those things that we often end up with cultures that are disconnected from the missions that brought people into the space in the first place. So that is a big part of what is happening. If you talk about community and diversity, and then on the inside, you are neither communal nor diverse, eventually that also comes out. So I think we are getting in a lot of that as well. I will also say, as a field that is very, very good at attracting, say, women and underrepresented groups, as we're starting to come into a space where members of these groups are looking to be paid what we are worth, that is also, I think, hitting in that space. So then what do? Which is leveling up on culture is really, really important. The second thing is preparing folks for what it looks like to be in this kind of space. You know, we had some plans way back in the day that said, you know, we'd have a staff of about 25. We got a staff of about 70 right now. So we also have to work to sort of get this right. But even if you asked any of my team members, they would still say we are understaffed at the moment, I think, in terms of thinking about that. But I would also say that it is also, we have to work on top down and we have to work in the environment, because when you start talking about, well, the salaries of individuals who work in these institutions, and there's a lot of push, well, you're just supposed to be in it for the mission. Why are you asking for more money?
You can't take that to the bank.
When that comes down sort of from external folks and our supports and our funders, you know, one of the things, you know, nonprofits will always get dinged at. Folks are looking at the salary levels on our sort of our 990s and those kind of documents, and that's basically saying in that space. So we do, I think, you know, have some pressure there. But I think for me, and particularly since I had the privilege of being part of the buildup and I got to do a lot of our initial interviews and conversations, people really do care about what we're doing, and that becomes the most important thing to them. And so I think in addition to just compensation, we have to remember to showcase and celebrate and be intentional about acknowledging the difference that we are making, because at the end of the day, right now, that seems to be what's the most important thing to the folks who are on the team.
Before we go to questions, you've doubled your team, right?
I want to just challenge some of the, and maybe add to some of the things that you've said here, because I know I grew up in the museum sector where it was, you were told it's an honor and a privilege to work here. Set the salary aside, you know, and a lot of people felt that. And it is now, yes, it is an honor and a privilege to work here. And we deserve a better salary and we deserve better working conditions. We at the AKG are in the process. We received 3 weeks ago a letter of intention to unionize at our organization. This is very new to us. I've become very, very quickly fluent in the language of labor relations in 3 weeks. And I'm finding that, yes, this is likely about salary and wages to some degree, but it's about, a quote from a member of the organizing committee, the ability to turn up the volume of their voice. And Gen Z, you know, a lot of our frontline staff, they want a voice at the table. And that is as important as salary, as important as working at a museum. And I think you could translate that to any other institution. Having a voice is really important to this next generation. And they're going to inherit our institution. So we're listening.
Speaking of having a voice, audience questions. So please, if the microphone has reached you, share who you are, where you're coming from. And remember, it's all being recorded and will be shared. So we have somebody over there, and then after that, maybe we can come to the lady in the front.
Hello.
Yes.
Hello.
Thank you.
Hi. First of all, thank you for being so gracious and transparent with your knowledge and sharing
Can
that
you
with
speak
all
a little
of us.
louder?
Oh, sorry. I'm very soft-spoken. First of all, thank you for being so gracious and sharing your knowledge with us this evening. Coming from an artist's point of view, museums historically have been the highest of the food chain within the art world. I was wondering how and if you guys how are you holding up the smaller levels of this food chain, such as artists through other art spaces within your communities? I am curious how the museum is working with either smaller artist-run galleries or residencies. Like, how are you contributing to the communities that you are placed in, besides just, you know, as a space to come and be inspired? What are you guys doing on the back end? On the back end of that situation? I'm just very
Silvia,
curious.
this is a great one for you, I think.
So a lot of our curatorial vision at the BAS is centered on and focuses on artist commissions. So we work with the artists. We don't gather as curators and decide what paintings will be on the wall and ship them over that much. We work with the artists from the very beginning. And usually my first question is, what is your dream? And what is that dream work of art that you have never been able to do or that you would like to do? And how can the museum help you and work with you kind of as an extension of your studio? So a lot of our curatorial department is really staffed that way, where we have people that really look into the technology and look into the production and look for like cost estimations and help the artists produce their work. So I think that's the biggest contribution the BAS has to individual artists.
What about
Yeah, I would add to that too in a very practical way. One of the things we've done at the Buffalo AKG is about 10 years ago, we established a public art initiative. So we have a public art program that serves the county that lives within the museum's curatorial department. And when we first started that, we were bringing in muralists and sculptors from around the world to bear on this local landscape. And we received a lot of negative feedback for that. And we were asked, how are you incorporating or building up the skills of local artists to be able to ultimately take over and author this narrative in their own backyard? And so we adjusted that program to make sure that every time we're bringing in a muralist that has, 80 or 100 or 150 walls under their belt, that we're also hiring local artists that want to learn those skills to be the artist assistants. And so that's just a very small way, but it's a way that we have been able to build that skill in our community. Did I see Idris walk in? Did I see, we have one of our local, Idris, you are a product, I think, of this, and now one of our muralists that we rely on regularly. So it's working, and now you're teaching other artists. So it's become a little bit of an ecosystem.
Great. We had a question right here.
Yes, hi. I am Moex. I'm an artist, and I'm originally from the Middle East, which is why I'm asking the next question.
Speak into the microphone.
How do you protect free expression, especially from external factors, either governments who have a lot of money, who don't necessarily have a good record of human rights, or people trying to influence other political views or exclude certain artists from certain areas?
Yeah.
Tonya.
Anybody want to take that?
Yeah,
So
Tonya, go ahead.
it's interesting for us because obviously we're a history museum, but where we start to dovetail is in the space of cultural appropriation, and who gets to be an artist and who is just a street crafts person. And so this is one of the spaces where we are, and so some of that is an elephant in the room, which is that we have a special exhibition, and so we can put things in there because we're in that that space. We can also, it was interesting, semi-subversive, we can also elevate some of that to the level of this is a special gift from the museum that we actually give out in that space. But you are right, when we're talking about the politics of free expression, especially right now, which is arguably what typically inspires a large percent of artists, like that is ultimately kind of where they are and where they sit. We do have a little more flexibility, I would say, than your typical museum because of the space that we're in. But what I have noticed is that because we're doing that, it gives a little more wiggle room to the other art spaces in our community, right? If the International African American Museum is all the way over here with this, because we could do this exhibition, then some of our more formalized spaces or some of our more aloof galleries that wanted to be in that space but didn't have room can use us as an excuse. Well, we don't want everyone going over to the New History Museum if that's where all of our audiences are going. This is where we have to do that. And so I've had some behind the scenes conversations around sort of that effect. And so I would say if you have sort of a little epicenter that can do a little bit of the normalization, it can sometimes have a healthy bleeding out effect into the rest of the community. Good luck.
Here's what unless anyone has to add to that? No. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to have a final question, and then we're going to stay and we'll mingle so you can talk to these wonderful people directly. But I am under strict orders from the show management to bring this baby home. So I'm going to just ask a last question. And no, I'm going to ask a last question, but you're welcome. But please do come up after that. And this is just so that we can end on a high note. Imagine that, I mean, surely someone in the room is starting a museum here. We have a lot of collectors, and these days everybody wants to start a museum. So say somebody who is planning to start a museum, build a museum, were to come to you, and you have your battle scars, you've just gone through this, you're about to go through this, and they want to build a museum. They have 3 years. They want to be very methodical. They want to plan ahead. They're going to build this thing. What's your advice that you'd like to give them? I'm going to start with Tonya, then Silvia, and Jillian. Just a quick one-sentence piece of advice. Whoever wants to build a museum.
All right. So other than you're about to discover what your favorite cocktail is, I would say never underestimate how soon you want to bring in the museum people. Right. A lot of times we start with the building, but the building is the house. A house is not a home. So one, think who's going to be in the building and who are the experts around who is going to be in that building is very good. And the second thing is to have one ridiculously ambitious goal associated with whatever it is that you're doing, so that no matter how much you get stuck in the weeds, that North Star was never supposed to happen next Tuesday. And so it keeps your energy up, and the reason that you're going to keep going forward stays front and center.
Silvia.
Spend a lot of time at the beginning developing your mission statement. What do you want to achieve? One thing. And every decision guide it to that one thing.
I think you guys agree on a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
Jillian, last
well,
word.
North Star is a big one. I'd say number one, double your timeline.
Speaking from experience.
Yeah. And your budget, by the way. And number two, bring it down a level from big, audacious North Star to like practical things we have to achieve. I'd put a list of 10 and like put it on your bulletin board. And anytime you are tempted to add more stuff, say, does it fit these things? Because it is so tempting to go off on all these tangents, and the world changes. I mean, look how fast the world just changed. The world changes in the middle of this, and you say, well, we have to respond to that, and we have to respond to that. And things can very quickly slide out of control. So I'd say have your top 10 things that you have to achieve and run everything through that filter.
Silvia wanted to add one more thing.
I don't say 10, I say one.
One. Okay, there
one
you go.
Thing.
Great. Well, I hope we gave you a sense of what museum leaders really like to talk about, even in public. And so thanks very much to our wonderful guests, and thank you all for coming. Enjoy the show.
Thank you.